As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
Don't tax the rich and the Fed. Select politicians, government officials, economic elites, and experts arriving at the annual World Economic Forum meeting in Davos, Switzerland, were greeted with an open letter signed by more than 250 billionaires and millionaires. The signers request their respective governments raise their taxes. The letter signers are concerned about inequality that they say has reached a tipping point. The cost of this inequality to our economic, societal, and ecological stability risk, the letter continues, is severe and growing every day. They may have a point. Since the 2008 market meltdown, resentment against those at the top of the income ladder has been growing. However, this is not because people are envious of those able to profit in a free market. Rather, the resentment is rooted in the corporatist system that rewards those who manipulate the political process. If the signatories to the letter want to truly end the type of inequality that fuels populist rage, they should stop calling for tax increases and instead call for an end to government programs and policies that benefit the rich and powerful. Including are those programs like the Export-Import Bank that subsidize large corporations, health and safety regulations that cartelize markets while failing to protect consumers, and interventionist foreign policy that enriches the military-industrial complex while making the rest of us poorer and more vulnerable to terrorist attacks. The Federal Reserve is the leading cause of inequality. This is not surprising, considering it was created at the behest of bankers and rushed through Congress just before Christmas when few Americans were paying attention. Many Americans became aware of how the central bank tailors its policies to benefit the financial elites following the 2008 meltdown. Then, the U.S. government, enabled by Fed money printing, bailed out large financial institutions while average Americans suffered. The Fed had been helping big firms for many years. In the 1990s, it was common for the Federal Reserve, then under the leadership of Alan Greenspan, to pump money into the market in response to a parent crisis. This was named the Greenspan put by the financial press. The new money would help some companies and their wealthy owners while reducing most Americans' purchasing power. Middle and working class Americans suffer the brunt of inflation, which is properly defined as the central bank pumping money into the economy, thus reducing the dollar's purchasing power. In a free market, most people will be able to have a satisfactory standard of living and recognize that the super rich earn their fortunes by offering goods and services that serve the needs and wants of consumers while providing good jobs at good wages to fellow citizens. In contrast, in a mixed economy supported by fiat money system, the average person will suffer a steady erosion of his standard of living thanks to the central bank's inflationary policies, while the crony capitalist prospers. This is a recipe for social instability. Those concerned with the detrimental effects of rising resentment of income inequality should support repealing all federal programs that reward crony capitalists, including programs that masquerading as providing national defense. They should also work to audit, then end the Fed. Thanks for listening.
So the U.S. launched another round of airstrikes in Iraq on Tuesday as tensions continue to soar in the region. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said in a statement that the strikes targeted 3 facilities used by Kateb Hezbollah and other what they called Iranian-affiliated groups, and that's referring to Iraq's Shia militias. Kateb Hezbollah is one of the main militias in Iraq. And a correspondent for Al Mayadeen said that the strikes targeted positions of the Popular Mobilization Forces in several areas. And the Popular Mobilization Forces, the PMF, they're a coalition of Iraqi militias that was formed in 2014 to fight ISIS. They're part of Iraq's security forces, and this is part of the reason why al-Sudani, the prime minister, has been getting so angry about these U.S. airstrikes, is that they've been targeting the PMF, which again is part of Iraq's security forces. So the El Mayadeen report said that there were strikes on Jerf al-Nasr, which is a town south of Baghdad, that killed at least 2 people, and that was just one area where these strikes were launched. It was several areas around Baghdad, so we don't have a clear count of casualties yet. So Austin said that the strikes were in retaliation for the attacks on U.S. bases in Iraq and Syria that started in mid-October in response to President Biden's support for the Israeli slaughter in Gaza. And in this statement, Austin claimed that the U.S. does not seek to escalate the conflict in the region, which is just an absurd thing for the U.S. to say. They've been bombing Iraq, Syria, Yemen. I mean, to say that they're not looking for escalation, just completely ridiculous. So there was an investigation from BBC that was published on Tuesday, and there's actually a documentary with it as well. And it focuses on political assassinations that have taken place in Yemen for years now. And it reveals that basically that they're backed by, they're being carried out by the UAE through proxies, through. It's an interesting report. Initially, they hired American mercenaries who were members of a group called Spear Operations Group, and they were very forthright with what they did, saying that, yes, we were involved in these assassinations, and most of the assassinations targeted the Muslim Brotherhood's affiliated political party in Yemen. They're mostly based in southern Yemen, in Aden and areas around there. And, you know, a lot of the people that were killed were just politicians. But anyway, so these American mercenaries started doing these assassinations. They say they stopped in 2016, but trained UAE forces who were based in Yemen to carry them out. And then they went on to train Yemenis. So, you know, pretty interesting. And again, this is part of the U.S.-backed coalition. The UAE joined the Saudis in the invasion of Yemen to oust the Houthis in 2015. So that is a very interesting aspect of this investigation. But what I thought was more important, considering everything that's happening in Yemen, was the details about Al-Qaeda being part of U.S.-backed forces in Yemen. So the STC's leader, so this Southern Separatist group's leader, his name is Idris al-Zubaydi. He's the vice president of the PLC, of this presidential council, and that's what the U.S. views as the legitimate government of Yemen. So this guy has Al-Qaeda guys running parts of his military. And after President Biden began striking the Houthis in Yemen over their attacks on Israel-linked commercial shipping, al-Zubaydi, the leader of the STC and vice president of the PLC, he called for U.S. support for a ground campaign against Ansar Allah, which is the Houthis. He said, quote, "Ground forces must be supported on the ground, and these forces belong to the legitimate government. These forces are the ones who can achieve a victory on the ground because strong strikes without ground operations are useless," end quote. So you have this guy. He wants a ground operation against the Houthis that's supported by the U.S. and the U.K., I believe he also said. And right now, there's no indication that the U.S. is looking to back a ground campaign like that, but the situation continues to escalate. The U.S. keeps bombing Yemen. They've done it 8 times now since January 12th, and U.S. officials say they're planning for an open-ended war. Here, the U.S. launches airstrikes in Somalia. That's right, Somalia. So this was these airstrikes were launched on January 21st. They were announced by U.S. Africa Command on Tuesday, and this marks the first known U.S. bombing of Somalia in 2024. So AFRICOM said in a press release that the strikes consisted of 2 separate engagements against al-Shabaab about 20 miles northeast of Kismayo, which is a port in southern Somalia. The command said the strikes were launched at the request of the U.S.-backed Mogadishu-based government. The command said that its initial assessment found 3 al-Shabaab fighters were killed and claimed that no civilians were harmed. But we always got to point out that AFRICOM specifically is notorious for undercounting civilian casualties, for hiding civilian casualties, and U.S. military operations in Somalia are shrouded in secrecy. So the last U.S. airstrikes in Somalia that were reported on AFRICOM took place on December 20th. There was 2 in December, and it was a few months before that they launched strikes in Somalia. And the reason why I say this is the first known U.S. bombing of this year is because the CIA could be conducting drone strikes in Somalia that we don't know about, or JSOC, more secretive military operations. But this is what we know, and it just goes to show, no matter what's going on, this war in Yemen, this war in Somalia just continues. I mean, this has been going on for, since George W. Bush at some level.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
So anyway, the clown spewing out the misinformation threat is that European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, piece of shit. How about that? She declared that misinformation and disinformation represents the greatest threat to the world, more than war and economic downturns. You ready? She begins by saying at Davos, goes on to say, "Dear Klaus, your annual global risk report makes for a stunning and sobering read. His fucking global risk report. You see what this fucking freak looks like? Klaus Schwab. Klaus Slob. Slobby bullshit with your arrogant fucking attitude. For the global business community, the top concern for the next 2 years is not conflict or climate. It is disinformation and misinformation. Yep. She called, you ready? For a collaboration between governments and corporations to fight against, quote, industrial scale disinformation. Okay. So the merger between governments and corporations to join together to do this, you'll love this. It's fascism, Van der Leyen. Oh, you're a German. I forgot. Oh, you love all the wars too. You support them. Fascism. Oh, according to a guy I don't like, not Mussolini. Yeah, he's Italian. Good and bad comes in all of them. Fascism is the merger of state and corporate powers. And that's all it is. You better get that jab. You better get that jab. No jab, no job. Stand 6 feet apart. And don't forget, when you jerk off, sanitize your hands. Don't forget, wear this mask. Because it says right on the box, these masks do not eliminate exposure to the risk of any disease or infection. Oh, yeah, but they're good for COVID. All right? Misinformation, that's all we're getting is fucking propaganda. And we don't give it to you. We give you the truth and trends. So subscribe, spread the word, because it keeps getting worse. Also at Davos was this woman who's running now the editor-in-chief of the Wall Street Journal. Yep. We own the news media. The Wall Street Journal's editor-in-chief, Emma Tucker, who they brought in from the UK, the FUCK. Yeah. She goes on to say, the Wall Street Journal's editor-in-chief, Emma Tucker, reminisced about a better time when public unquestionably believed anything the mainstream media told them. She said at the World Economic Forum this past Friday, quote, if you go back not too long ago, we own the news. We own the news. Hey, how about go fuck yourself? Who the fuck are you to say you own the news? Shut the fuck up, Salenti. Be an obedient little boy like the rest of the people out there. You're a fighter and they hate fighters. They own the news. Davos' greatest threat is misinformation and disinformation. You must swallow their shit. We own the news. Oh, yeah. You're the fucking, oh, I forgot. The toilet paper record, the New York slime. That's Saddam Hussein. He's getting them aluminum tubes. Yeah, to build them weapons of mass destruction. Total fucking lie. We own what we tell you. And that's why you get the Trends Journal, because we're giving you what nobody in the world is. So going back to Lagarde, along with Jerome Powell, the U.S. Fed head, there's no inflation, Salenti. Your Trends Journal, you don't know what you're talking about. It's only temporary. It's only transitory. And in the woke world, it's transgendatory. Oh, show you the bullshit coming out about misinformation and about how they own the news. By the way, 5 or 6 corporations own well over 90% of America's media. Yeah. It's a crime syndicate. And Newsweek, January 22nd, yesterday, Russian state TV predicts World War III. Well, blow me away. That's one of our top trends for 2024. Oh, and we said World War III began when? COVID war, Ukraine war, World War. Back in February 22nd, 2022. A top Kremlin propagandist predicted that World War III will break out in the Middle East. Son of a bitch. A propagandist. They're not propagandists. Media whores, the prostitutes that put out for their corporate pimps and government whoremasters. No. These are I'm not a propagandist. We called World War III. It's one of our top trends for 2024. Almost a month before she said this. Kremlin propagandists have routinely warned of looming world war. Propagandists, they use it again. That's how they get people to hate. And that's how they sell misinformation.
You run your mouth and I run my business, brother. You tell everybody I'm busted. You talk so much you got me disgusted. But you run your mouth and I run my business, brother.
You guys see this news story down in Texas? They had barbed wire up. You know, you can't be building walls. Oh, here, we can show everyone. Look, I got the story for you guys. There we go. So you've got down in Texas, you can't quite build a wall. You can't put these items, the courses, so that making sure that if the people get into the country, they're actually great acrobats. You can't do any of these things. You can't do any of the preventative measures. You got to let as many people in as possible for the duration of the Biden administration. That's the way that they're running this thing. You got to let all the people in. That's the way it's working. And for some reason, the Supreme Court has decided that Texas, after having put up all this border fencing and barbed wire, they got to actually pull the barbed wire down. Did the Supreme Court give us a reason for why they got to pull down all the barbed wire? For some reason, no. They didn't give us any reason whatsoever, but they got to pull down all the barbed wire. So this was from USA Today. Texas political stunts like placing razor wire near the border simply make it harder and more dangerous for frontline personnel to do their jobs, because the frontline personnel is responsible for trying to get as many people into the country as possible. And it's not easy to do if you got barbed wire there. This is an evacuation of Mexico. We're trying to get as many people over this border as quickly as possible. And if you're going to put barbed wire in the way of the people who are trying to monitor these things as if they're a fire exit, and you got to keep these things clear for the evacuation, we're trying to get as many people of the Mexicans to our country and have it. Well, firstly, what is frontline personnel? What exactly is that? Is that border control patrol? Is that some other division of government that shows up to stand on the front lines, and then anything anyone does to try and fix a situation, they go, hey, you're getting in my way as the frontline personnel of making sure that everything's dysfunctional. Maybe that's the way it works. Government, they want to be dysfunctional at all time. So you got the frontline personnel at the front lines making sure that whatever's supposed to be, could fix the situation, isn't taking place. I talked about this on the end of year recap. Go check it out, where Biden said, hey, putting up a border wall is not a serious policy solution. They don't come up with a better solution. They don't have a better idea, but whatever you're out there doing, they're like, hey, that's not going to work, and that's not a good idea. This was from the New York Times, and I thought this was interesting, that the New York Times is even recognizing that the old guard of the GOP is a dwindling faction. Let's give this a read. Tuesday night's results showed that the time is coming to sit Shiva for the Republican Party of the Bushes, Cheneys, and Romneys, and the donor class that once played an outsized role in shaping the party is now a desperate group of bystanders. Miss Haley ran on a traditional Republican platform, one that has faded during the Trump years. She campaigned on issues like reducing federal spending and enacting a staunchly interventionist foreign policy and overhauling programs like Social Security and Medicare. Do you guys remember how much the old school Republican Party sucked? Isn't it amazing like that there's still those people out there that are like, we're just going to pretend like we're going to balance the budget, and we're actually just going to spend even more money pretending like everyone's trying to invade and kill our country. Her candidacy was embraced by the pre-Trump GOP as the gang got back together for one last shot at the interloper. In other words, the deep state was like, oh, well, maybe we can get our candidate in here. Traditional party donors from Wall Street who loathe Mr. Trump poured money into Miss Haley's super PAC, and in New Hampshire, she seemed to have a political environment more hospitable than in Iowa, with a voting base that is less religious and more educated. Return to office mandates don't help companies make more money, because apparently, I said at the beginning of the whole thing, not only do you have to waste all this energy getting to work, but then once you're at work, you know how much energy you have to waste pretending like you're working, versus when you're at home, you just kind of get to be efficient about it. All right. Next topic. We've got Alaska Airline found loose bolts on many of its Boeing MAX 9 jets. And remember, I told you guys, you can't trust anybody anymore. There's no such thing as the experts. Remember, you have to stay home. You can't see your grandmother before she dies. No going to work. Listen, for medical reasons, don't interact with other people. Don't show up to your job. That's going to be healthier. It's going to be healthier for you just to stay home, watch Netflix, and drink alcohol, because you can't show up anywhere because we've got a 6-foot rule that just kind of sort of appeared. That's the way science works. It just kind of sort of appeared. And then once we said it, we realized that we needed to be fully committed to the thing that we said, because sometimes there's a scientific process and you're running experiments, and sometimes things just kind of sort of appear. Unlike the virus, because I paid and bought that one. So that one, we knew about the virus, but the 6 feet thing that told everyone that they had to, that just kind of sort of appeared. And so if there was one thing that you were all supposed to take away from COVID, is that you can't trust anybody for anything, any of the times. And that applies now all the way to airlines, which apparently just have loose bolts. And I already told you, you got to practice your neuroticism at home, and you got to start showing up and asking questions to that pilot. If you just get onto a flight, peacefully sit in your seat, and you think it's just going to take off and land where it's supposed to land without a door falling off, that is your own fault. It wasn't just one door that fell off. Apparently, they forgot all sorts of bolts on these things. Even I, a person with zero understanding of anything technical. You guys see the issues we have on this show where sometimes I discover, oh, you got to plug in that cord. You got to check this down. But even I understand bolts. Even I understand, hey, there was supposed to be a screw there and that wing can fall off.
George Mason's objections to the Constitution were published in the Virginia Journal on November 22nd. He had his name on it, so it certainly... And he owned it, so it certainly did not do real well for his reputation. But I think he was in his early 60s at that point, and he was just like, I'm going to stand on principle. It doesn't really matter where things go. And here he is. Again, on the 19th, he points out that the judiciary of the United States is so constructed and extended. This is June 19th, 1788, in the Virginia ratification debates, where he and Patrick Henry and William Grayson and a few others were arguing against Edmund Randolph, James Madison, etc., the Federalist supporters. And here's Mason saying that the judiciary is so constructed and extended as to absorb and destroy the judiciaries of the several states, thereby rendering law as tedious, intricate, and expensive, and justice as unattainable by a great part of the community as in England, and enabling the rich to oppress and ruin the poor. So if it was only the rich and powerful who could defend themselves in a centralized court system, the people, the average person and the poor would certainly be at a disadvantage, is what he warned. Now, here he is also saying he's concerned that as to controversies between citizens of different states, their power is improper and inadmissible. He's talking about writ of execution here as well. He says, to controversies between a state and the citizens of another state, how will their jurisdiction in this case go? He says, is not this disgraceful? Is this state to be brought to the bar of justice like a delinquent individual? Is the sovereignty of the state to be arraigned like a culprit or private offender? Will the states undergo this mortification? I think this power perfectly unnecessary. So one of the things that he did not want federal courts to have jurisdiction on would be controversies between a state and citizens of another state, precursor in essence to the 11th Amendment. He said, what is to be done if a judgment be obtained against a state? Will you issue a fieri facias? My Latin is not good, but that's basically a writ of execution. They're going to go force the state to do something. He said it would be ludicrous to say that you could put a state's body in jail. How is the judgment then to be enforced? A power which cannot be executed ought not to be granted. Jefferson discussed this with Madison. He said the negative proposed to be given them on all acts of the several legislatures is now the first time suggested to my mind. He didn't even think that that would be an option under the Constitution. He said, prima facie, I do not like it. So just straight up, without even getting into discussion, the idea of them having a negative in Congress or the executive branch over all the acts of the states, he was not on board. But he thought maybe the judiciary could do something like this. He said, would not an appeal from the state judicatures to a federal court in all cases where the Act of Confederation controlled the question be as effectual a remedy and exactly commensurate to the defect? So he's saying what you're proposing, James Madison, is to give them power in 100% of the situation when really we're only concerned about 1 out of 100. 1% of the time we need federal power to get involved here. And so why not just go to have a federal court system that can strike things down when they need to? And that will deal with that situation. And so that's what Jefferson was recommending. And George Mason certainly didn't like that type of thing. And here he is again to James Madison in March of 1789, pointing out that the judiciary is a body which, if rendered independent and kept strictly to their own department, merits great confidence for their learning and integrity. So Jefferson or George Mason on the one hand is basically saying we can't rely on them because they are federal judges. It doesn't matter who they are. We know that they're going to actually get some great legal minds on there. They certainly did. John Jay, James Iredell, and a few others. But Jefferson was saying, well, no, the structure is going to lead towards great confidence. So he had an opposite view on that in 1789. Now, in the years to follow, Jefferson certainly didn't like how it was working in practice. He was very unhappy, especially with the Marshall Court. Here's a letter to Spencer Roane in September of 1819. He says, the Constitution, on this hypothesis, this view that the federal courts have the final say over the entirety of the Constitution, over the people themselves, the people of the several states, despite the fact that, well, they're the sovereign. And sovereignty means final authority. In essence, sovereignty, final authority has been transferred to 9 unelected, unaccountable, politically connected lawyers that wear dresses, in essence. I mean, and Jefferson didn't put it that way. Maybe he liked the styles. But the Constitution on this hypothesis, wrote Jefferson, is a mere thing of wax in the hands of the judiciary, which they may twist and shape into any form they please. Here he is again, Thomas Jefferson, in his draft for the Kentucky resolutions. Sometime before October of 1798, he points out this idea that if you give someone else the final say over what your Constitution means, you are under unlimited power. You're basically living under the whims of their views. He says every state has a natural right in cases not within the compact. So anytime the federal government does something that the states, and he's not talking about state governments, this is the people of the several states in their highest sovereign capacity. The state governments work for those people of each state. So if the people want the government there to do something, that's still ultimately the power flows from the people. He says every state has a natural right in cases not within the compact to nullify of their own authority all assumptions of power by others within their limits. So the people who strike down a federal act, he's saying the people of each state on its own, on their own say-so, their own authority, they can nullify. Now, that doesn't mean they're overturning it and the federal government's just going to back down just because a state says this is unconstitutional. The rest of the country isn't just going to necessarily agree with them. Of course, the idea that Jefferson said was we're going to state these principles, we're going to take our position on the Alien and Sedition Acts, and we're going to encourage the other states to agree with us. Because the more that we have on board, the easier it's going to be to overturn this or get rid of it, because the federal government isn't going to back down if everyone complies. Anyway, so they can nullify of their own authority all assumptions of power by others within their limits. He said that without this right, they would be under the dominion, absolute and unlimited, of whosoever might exercise this right of judgment for them. He said they are construing our Constitution from a coordination of a general and special government to a general and supreme one alone. So they were going to have a government with specially delegated powers, expressly delegated powers and reserved. Everything else is reserved. As James Madison described it in Federalist 45, the powers delegated to the proposed government were going to be few and defined. Those reserved with the states were numerous and indefinite. And he's saying things have already turned around here by 1820. They've really been using the power of the federal court system to transfer that, to transform things from this government of limited delegated powers into one that was supreme in all cases. He said this will lay all things at their feet. Jefferson said the engine of consolidation will be the federal judiciary. The other two branches, the corrupting and corrupted instruments. And this isn't much different than what George Mason warned about all the way back on June 19th, 1788. It's kind of a long passage, but I think it's really interesting in comparison to what Jefferson was saying some decades later. He said the principle itself, talking about how the federal judiciary has so much jurisdiction, it's involved in so many things. He said it goes to the destruction of the legislation of the states, whether or not it was intended. As to my own opinion, here's Mason with his tinfoil hat on, conspiracy theory, crazy guy, of course. He said, as to my own opinion, I most religiously and conscientiously believe that it was intended, though I am not absolutely certain. But I think it will destroy the state governments, whatever may have been the intention. So he said, there are many gentlemen in the United States, said George Mason, who think it right that we should have one great national consolidated government, wink, wink, Hamilton, Morris, and others, and that it was better to bring it about slowly and imperceptibly rather than all at once. You see how Jefferson pointed this out in the 1800s, that the federal judiciary was the tool of consolidating imperceptibly and slowly over time, step by step. And this is exactly what George Mason warned would happen. And certainly once Chief Justice John Marshall went in there with the Hamiltonian view that necessary meant convenient to government power, that was the nail in the coffin right there.
Polling definitely suggests that the younger generation is taking a different view on our interventionist foreign policy. Support for a continued U.S. involvement in the Middle East among young people is very low, it's historically low, and I think the same is true for U.S. involvement in Ukraine. So we are seeing that shift now. They're sort of jettisoning off this old boomer mentality that we want to run the world. But now you mentioned the Ron Paul Scholar Seminar, and you were in our first class, and I probably should have started with this because this is how we met you. You were in the inaugural class. We didn't know how it was going to go, what we were doing, what was going to happen. I think we've now had 4 or 5 classes. I'm biased, but I love the program. Tell our viewers who aren't familiar with it what it was all about and what your experiences were at the seminar.
Yeah, so the Ron Paul Institute Summer Scholar Seminar was essentially a weekend PhD program in peace and prosperity. It exposed us to leading voices in foreign policy, specifically looking at the non-interventionist roots of American foreign policy and why that is the correct answer. It brought people together to just really do a deep dive into returning to the foreign policy of the founding fathers, to jettison the old guard of the neoconservative movement. And ultimately, I think it was a discourse on courage as well, because the reality is the moment you show that you have non-interventionist leanings, you lose out on any chance that the establishment is going to bring you into their fold. Politics is not going to be comfortable for you, but at least you are going to be telling the truth. And I mean, that's one of the best parts about the Ron Paul Institute Summer Scholars Program is it was truth even when inconvenient, and truth even when it took the utmost courage to tell the truth. And it's an incredible program. And if foreign policy is one of your issues, I mean, one of my top issues that I intend to fight for when I'm in Frankfurt is defend the guard. It's one of the few things that state legislators can do to fight for a non-interventionist foreign policy. It currently has more than 10 co-sponsors in Kentucky already, mostly young Americans brought up in the Ron Paul movement. And it's an essential thing. We have to make sure that our activists and our politicians are deeply rooted in principle and understand the importance of foreign policy.
For people that aren't familiar, tell us what Defend the Guard is all about.
Absolutely. So the majority of individuals who are deployed in these undeclared wars are not members of the Army, Navy, Marine, Air Force. They are members of the state National Guards, which the National Guard is one, America's oldest branch of the military. It was designed specifically to defend the homeland. These individuals signed up to defend the homeland, but now they are being sent into foreign wars that are completely undeclared. There's no declaration of war from Congress. What Defend the Guard is it's a means by which state governments can reclaim their authority over the National Guard by simply enacting a law that states that unless Congress declares war, their National Guardsmen cannot be deployed into foreign territories for combat purposes. It's essential legislation. It is carried in states where it's being carried. It's largely being carried by veterans who understand that our foreign policy has gotten out of control. It's crucial. It's one of the top priorities that state governments should be addressing.
You know, this whole idea of truth, and you brought it up, but we talk a lot about that, and I think is so key, probably a principle from the beginning of time, you know, for the first recordings of history, this subject existed. And now we're at a crisis point because, TJ, you explain and say, and the people you're close to, that the young people are looking at that, and they understand this, and they're sick and tired of not hearing the truth. And I did a little pamphlet, a little booklet to try to explain my thoughts on this, and I see what's going on is there's a major contest going on between those who know and understand and want to always move toward the truth versus those who now have deified the whole principles of nihilism, that you can't know the truth, so why even try? And yet I think, as bad as it seems, that we're getting to a climactic understanding of these two things. You know, when I was campaigning a lot, I would, and I would try to explain to, especially the young people, it's the young people they register and draft and send off to war, and it's just horrible. The young people don't start the wars. I mock it by saying, you know, we don't have our wars because a group of 18 to 25-year-old young people in the United States get together and they find that same number of young people in some other country 6,000 miles away, and the young people get together and say, oh, let's have a war. It sounds like a lot of fun. I mean, but the young people have been too complacent. We've all been too complacent because we live in a society where, the adults are doing all the pushing and there's financial thing. So I am really, really excited about what's the transition and the defining of this message. And TJ, I think you're a real exception on being able to, describe this. So I compliment you about your efforts, and I know you have a great future in promoting this cause. To finish up here, I'll give you a chance in a minute to put out an address and how we can guide some more people to you. But there's a saying that I've used frequently, and that is that truth is treason in an empire of lies. So we, in fighting for our liberties, we have to understand that there's a group of people out there that believe in tyranny, and they want to promote it. So we have to fight this, because we hear it all the time. Some people, have a little demonstration. Well, they're terrorists. They're playing treason. Yeah, but that's the whole effort, is to maintain the empire. So we have to get that out of the notion. The founders did not give us an empire. They gave us a republic. So I'm delighted that you're going to be with us and continue to be with us in that struggle. Go ahead and close out, TJ, and tell them how they can reach you.
Certainly. Well, first of all, thank you all so much for having me once again. And Dr. Paul, truly the only reason I'm in this race, the only reason that any of the people that I named are in this, is because of the contributions that you made to this call. So it really means a lot to be on here. There is a remnant of young people who see the lies that we have been fed, and you can keep up with my race. I mean, I'm on Twitter. It's at @RealTJRoberts. My website is votetjr.com. And for any contributions, it's votetjr.com/donate. And if anyone has any questions about my race, they can reach me at tj@votetjr.com, or even shoot me a text message at 859-446-0185.